Oh, hello dear patients. I hadn't seen you there. Your favorite doctor here, Dr. Plague. I've had a morbid curiosity and fascination about these creatures here, like the one I am examining right now. They're called, RNA, or, spiders. These eight-legged abominations are, for a lack of a better word, terrifying. If you watch my video about the 5 scariest chase scenes in video games, which you can find in the upper right corner of this video right now, you know that I suffer from arachnophobia, and the mere sight of a spider shakes me to my very core. Then why, oh why are you doing a video about spiders, Mr. Doctor? Well, the answer is very simple. It is because they are in every fucking video game ever made. That may be an exaggeration, but seriously, spiders have been a consistent part in video games for a long time, and it is understandable. Many people suffer from this kind of phobia, thus the use of spiders or arachnid-like creatures as enemies in games of any type, especially horror, has a deep unsettling effect in games. However, people with arachnophobia may be unable to participate in otherwise great experiences just because of these types of enemies. So today, we are going to take a look at these creatures' representation in video games and discuss whether they are a plague that should be exterminated or a friendly bug we should learn to coexist with. Let's go! First of all, there are different roles that spiders can play in video games. Most of the time, they are nothing more than a normal type of enemy, a simple yet annoying mob. They can be extremely fast no matter how big they are, might use silk to either attack or stun the player, and might also inflict some type of poison damage using their fangs. In contrast, they can also play a more passive role as mere environmental hazards or easily disposable enemies. These pesky abominations usually inhabit dark and dreary places, such as caves, forests, or abandoned ruins. However, their placement is not always accurate, which has led many people to typecast these creatures as bottom-of-the-barrel enemies and tiresome trope. Spiders can be found as regular mobs in a great variety of gaming genres, from platforming to action RPG games. But you don't have to take my words as plague-ridden facts, because we're going to take a look at some examples of how spiders are represented as regular enemies in different types of games. Yes, I will subject myself to the torture of checking out these horrible monstrosities, because I hate myself. Alright, let's start with horror games, and what a better way to start than with one of the most recognizable and better horror franchises in gaming history. That's right, I'm talking about Resident Evil. We've seen spiders appear in the franchise since the very beginning of the saga with the first game, with giant spiders crawling around the Spencer mansion, waiting on some careless intruder to devour. Once the player makes its way to the Black Tiger's den, they can find this even more gigantic spider, as if the other ones were not big enough. We go from the first game all the way to Code Veronica, where the previous spiders were replaced by Black Widows, which are a bit less imposing in comparison to the former. But wait, there's more. There's a reason why I'm showing footage from the Chronicles games instead of the original ones, besides the spiders being recreated in a lot of terrifying detail, and it is, dear fucking lord, they can jump now. Yes, with the release of the Darksiders Chronicles, Capcom introduced these new spiders from the original story of the game since, the other ones weren't horrible enough without the need of being based on a fucking jumping spider. I apologize in advance for my foul use of the language, but trust me, this is only my first outburst in the video. These latter enemies make a lot of sense though, given that the story of this game takes place in South America, which is home of this species of spiders. God, this is only the first example and I feel sick already. You might say, well, Mr. Doctor, horror games are supposed to be scary, so spiders fit very well in this type of games. So what about games that are more kid-friendly or oriented towards children like adventure and platforming games? Let me tell you, there are some pretty notable examples and some disturbing ones. First, let's start with one of the most well-known examples, the Skulltulas. These enemies can be found in many Zelda games, but their first appearance was in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time and are spiders with a skull for a body. Their front side is rock hard and it's not vulnerable to sword attacks, so the player must wait until they flip around to discover their underbelly and attack it. However, they can be attacked on the front side when playing as adult Link with a bow or hookshot. While these enemies are not very realistic in their design, they more than make up for it with their disturbing looks. As a side note, there is a location in this game called the House of Skulltula, a house located in Kakariko village that holds a nice surprise of an entire family turned into talking human Skulltula hybrids. Rated E for everyone. These Skulltulas appear mostly inside dungeons, so their existence and behavior makes sense within the norms of reality. Another kid-friendly game that used spiders as enemy was Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy. In fact, there is an entire level dedicated to these abominations, called Spider Cave. This place is filled with spiders that are either crawling on the floor or hanging from the ceiling, waiting to descend upon you. Luckily, they can be dispatched with 1 or 2 blows, and their appearance is very cartoony, so this place shouldn't represent a problem for arachnophobes. Now Jak 2 is a completely different story. And speaking of getting chased by a giant 8-legged freak in a kid-friendly game, let's check out Rayman 2, The Great Escape. As I previously mentioned in my chase scenes video, this game was pretty dark, dealing with heavy themes and disturbing scenery in general. But once the player arrives at a level and Rayman is moving towards the camera, you just know that something bad is going to happen. Once the player starts to advance, a huge hairy spider drops from the ceiling and starts chasing Rayman, while one of the most disturbing pieces of music starts playing in the background. Seriously, having the giant spider wasn't scary enough? Holy fuck! This enemy spider appears multiple times throughout the game and can actually be killed. However, it is extremely tough and its attacks deal a considerable amount of damage, so better be careful if you intend on killing this hellspawn. Moving on. One game in genre that absolutely loves spiders is action RPG, especially games that take place in a fantasy setting, so let's look at some. From Software is a widely recognized studio for making hard games in fantasy settings, and the one we'll be taking a look at right now is called Bloodborne. Even though this game has a boss called Rom the Vacuum Spider, we're not going to talk about that here because just look at it. It looks more like a potato than a spider. Fortunately, there are some other spiders in Bloodborne, like the ones you can find in the Chalice dungeons, which are optional areas apart from the main game. The spiders here can ambush you by falling from the ceiling or can be summoned by a chime made an enemy in the dungeon. These latter ones are the most dangerous since they can sneak up on you out of nowhere and give you a heart attack. However, there is another spider encounter that is a little bit more frightening to say the least. Once the hunter arrives at the final area of the game, the Nightmare of Mensis, the player faces a lot of hardships, like environmental hazards and some tough giant enemies, before arriving to a big entrance. Naturally, players want to enter the place and advance as quickly as possible in order to escape from the other mobs outside, but a careful look will reveal that the next room is filled to the brim with regular spiders hanging from the ceiling and one ginormous spider hanging in the middle of the room, which drop to the floor once the hunter enters the room properly. I'll tell you a funny story. The first time I played this section of the game, it was at 3 AM and I didn't look up when entering the room, I just ran in like an animal. Once the spiders dropped from the ceiling, I was so incredibly shocked and scared that they killed me, so I immediately quit the game, turned off my PS4 and watched some cartoons in order to calm myself before going to sleep. So the lesson when it comes to spiders is, always be aware of your surroundings, they're everywhere. Another fantasy game involving spiders is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Yes, one of the best games ever made has the presence of these puke-inducing bugs. Well, partly. That is because if you only have the base game, you will never encounter these foul creatures, given that they were introduced in the Hearts of Stone expansion pack DLC, even though the base game had some arachnoid creatures called Kikimora and a gigantic spider-like boss called Harisi. However, when speaking of spider mobs, the worst of the bunch have to be arachnomorphs. These things like to attack the player in big groups and use wave-based attacks to lower your speed and gank you up more easily. But in addition to their annoying attacks and their high speed, these fucking abominations are hideous. They have thick black fur, have very real spider facial features and are the size of dogs, although there is a slightly bigger one that the player must face as a mini boss in a cave in order to retrieve a treasure. Believe me, you do not want to run into a group of these things. And now, the mention you have been all waiting for since I mentioned fantasy-inspired RPGs. That's right, let's talk about the spiders in Skyrim because boy oh boy, they are quite a handful this lot. One of the first quests, if not the first one players do for the Jarl of Whiterun, is going on a cave to recover something, and once they get to a certain point in the quest, they start seeing cobwebs in the cave, so it's already pretty obvious that we're walking into the wolf's mouth. Or, in this case, the spider's nest. Once players enter the nest, they run into their first encounter with a giant frostbite spider. Now, Skyrim is a huge game when you can get lost for hours on end doing side quests, following the story, or just messing around exploring the world and its dungeons. But these creatures can immediately turn an arachnophobe off the game. The spiders in Skyrim are just plain horrifyingly ugly. They move in an unsettling manner and attack the players with their fangs and front legs. They can also cause status effects such as poison and frostbite, hence the name of the creature. With Skyrim focusing heavily on its RPG elements, mobs can vary according to your level, so while at the beginning you will only find the giant spiders in caves and dungeons, and regular-sized ones in the overworld, once the player is at a high enough level, they will find more giant spiders in the dungeons and even in the overworld. There are a few other details I want to discuss about these terrifying creatures in Skyrim, but we'll get back to them eventually. For this next genre, it's all about luck and the whims and desires of the god of RNG, so there is no telling or exact place where you'll find our arachnid foes. You just have to keep your eyes wide open as we venture into some roguelike games that use spiders as enemies. And what a better way to start than talking about one of the best games in the genre, The Binding of Isaac. This game has many unusual things in it, a lot of religious symbolism and imagery, twisted creatures, and a lot of shit for some reason I have yet to understand. However, there are also spiders in all sizes and shapes. There are small spiders, big spiders, red spiders, bomb spiders, and head spiders, or whatever the hell is this abomination supposed to be. These bugs are very light-hearted in comparison to most of the unspeakable horrors that we've seen so far in this video, but don't get too comfy yet. And it is also not the last time that we talk about Isaac in this video, that's for sure. Now, we dig our way underground to check this indie game called Spelunky, where you explore caves and ancient ruins looking for treasure and glory. Naturally, where there's caves and ruins, there's also spiders, and in this game we have two different types of spiders. The speedy ones that are not as big, even though they are technically the same size as the playable characters, which jump towards the player in order to attack, but can be easily killed. And the bigger, slower ones that are a bit more intimidating and ugly, with a very uncanny and realistic walking animation, which are tougher to kill but offer you an upgrade if you manage to finish the deal. Although most people who are afraid of spiders will rather flee than fight. With most games, you have enough time to prepare for a spider attack, but not with this game since you can't see the enemy ahead of you until the battle is on. Of course, I am talking about a game where spiders should be the lesser of all fears, and its forbidden name is Darkest Dungeon. With a name like this, it's pretty obvious that there will be spiders, considering their gaming presence being so prevalent in dungeons and ruins, and here we have two types of spiders as well, even though their only difference is their color and attack abilities. Red spiders can use a web attack to stun the character in the party, while green spiders have poisonous attacks. Oh look, I am in this game, how wonderful. One thing to be highlighted from this game is that the art style is absolutely stunning and stylish, so the spiders don't look as terrifying. However, they inspire fear in the hearts of all players, arachnophobia or not, because of their stun and poison combo, their own resistance to poison attacks, and their high evasion rate, which is pretty accurate with real spiders, and their power to disappear after you take your eyes off of them for 1 second. For the final genre in this section about enemies, we're going to take a look at survival games. Yeah, as if surviving the environment, monsters, hunger and other things wasn't enough, you have to deal with spiders as well. So, let's take a look at one of my favorite survival games, and one of the first I ever played, Don't Starve. This game's art looks taken straight from a Tim Burton movie, which is always a plus in my book, but that doesn't make the game's spider any less disturbing. There are various types of spiders in the game, starting with the regular spiders that can be found in the world, and let me tell you, these are a nightmare for beginner players. They can easily overwhelm players given that they attack in groups. These beasts can be found around spider nests, and once these nests start to grow, they can also spawn warrior spiders, which are basically the same with a different color and improved speed and attack. And at the final level of nests grow, the Spider Queen will spawn as a boss, and this one is significantly bigger than her minions. She can spawn nurse spiders, which are far uglier than the regular ones and can heal them in battle. However, there are two other types of spiders that appear in the game, which are cave spiders and spitters. These variations only appear in the caves, and while the cave spiders look funny rather than menacing, I mean, just look at this thing, it looks like it's wearing a silly soldier hat. The spitters? Oh lord, keep that thing away from me. They have a different attack pattern too because, as their name implies, they can spit web projectiles at the player in addition to the biting attack. That's one way to dissuade players from spelunking. And finally, to end this section, we'll talk about Terraria. What? You were expecting me to mention Minecraft spiders? Now come on, this is an exhaustive work of research and documentation. I am a man of science and knowledge, and only the deepest corners of arcane knowledge can satisfy me. Plus Minecraft sucks. When you explore the caves in this amazing 2D sandbox world, you might run into huge ass spiders. And yes, I know they are just pixel art spiders, but every Terraria player knows the dread of entering a dark cave full of cobwebs and start hearing the spine-chilling sounds these things can produce. They can also walk on background walls too, so they have a huge movement advantage over the player. Oh, and these hideous creatures get a buff once the player enters hard mode, and in addition to dealing more damage, they look twice as horrifying. Better keep your distance if you don't want to be torn to shreds. As it has already been established, spiders prominently play a role as a common enemy, a pesky yet terrifying mob that can either be annoying or the death of all we know. However, this isn't always the case. Some games elevate the status of spiders as leaders of a legion of minions, or terrible gigantic creatures that must be defeated to beat an area. Without further ado, let's take a look at some instances where spiders were used as bosses in video games. We return once again to action-adventure games, and once again we set our eyes upon The Legend of Zelda, only this time we're going further in time to Twilight Princess. In the 6th dungeon of the game, the Temple of Time, we can find Twilight Arachnid Armogoma. And now we're treading once again into nightmare territory. Despite it being a fantasy-inspired spider, it looks so damn realistic, and it moves in a very realistic way as well, so this is something terrifying to look at. To complete the uncanny looks, it has a giant eye located at the top of its abdomen, which of course is its weak spot. One interesting detail about this fight is that once you shoot the eye and the spider falls flat on its back, you must use the statues in the corners of the room to smash it like the vermin it is. However, this monstrosity isn't gonna go down without a fight, and one of its attacks involves literally giving birth to smaller spiders. Excuse me, I think I'm gonna go throw up. Once you defeat it, the giant eye turns into a little spider that can be easily dispatched. This boss isn't particularly hard to defeat, but the mere shock of its looks can turn down any player with even a slight fear of spiders. We jump from one Nintendo franchise to another. This company is very family friendly and doesn't delve much into horror games, although many Nintendo games have some pretty fucked up stuff. So, what's Nintendo's creepiest franchise? In a perfect world, we'd be talking about Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, and its multiple sequels, but again, life's not fair, is it? When talking about horror-themed games made by the Big N, the most prominent franchise is Luigi's Mansion, which is spooky, sure, but in a very light-hearted way, unless you get to that part where Luigi apparently hung himself, but I digress. In the second game in the franchise, Dark Moon for the Nintendo 3DS, the first boss that we face is a giant purple spider. You know, it's curious how even these spiders that are supposed to be cartoony can still inspire dread in the hearts of arachnophobes. This spider in particular is cartoony enough to be in this lighthearted game, but it's still massive and moves in an unnerving way, and after getting hit, it runs toward the screen in order to get you. If you're playing this game in 3D, that's not a particularly nice sight to behold. Turns out the spider was possessed by a ghost, and once defeated, the spider turns back to its regular size, which to be honest is still fucking huge, and lives with its offspring. Please never come back. On the absolute polar opposite, we have the dark and dreary world of Darksiders, which is based on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Lovely times. There is a level that is absolutely infested with our arachnid friends, and at the end, well, the player encounters Silitha, a colossal talking spider that is not that realistic, but its design is absolutely horrifying. As for the fight itself, despite its size, it can teleport around the stage and fall on top of the player, taking a considerable amount of health. It can also cling to the ceiling and throw exploding orbs in a circular pattern, which can be used as leverage to reach it and throw it off the ceiling. Once the spider falls from the ceiling, it goes down various floors until it gets impaled in a huge pointy rock and war can claim its heart. Lovely times. Since this creature can't talk, it taunts the player throughout the battle with a raspy voice, which can be very unsettling. Spiders don't speak for a good reason. We return once again to the action RPG genre, but now we're going to a place that no one ever wants to be in, Dark Souls 2. But we're not here to talk about Dark Souls 2's quality. Instead, let's take a look at one of its most interesting areas, Brightstone Cove Seldora. This place is swarmed with spiders. Spiders on the ground, on the walls, on the ceiling, fucking everywhere. With this in mind, once the player gets to what seems to be the end of the area and it's covered by giant cobwebs, they know what they're up for. Or do they? Because I think nobody expected the sheer horror of what waits behind the mist door. The Duke's dear Freya is a ginormous spider with 2 fucking heads. Yeah, because one horrifying spider face isn't enough. Because spiders are fucking little bitches, of course she sends her offspring after the player in the battle. She can also spit poison projectiles, attack with her legs and fangs, and, get this, shoot a fucking laser from her mouth. Seriously, fuck this game. One interesting detail is that if the player deals enough damage to a single head, it will fall off, and they won't be able to damage her backside anymore. Thus, it is recommended to switch positions regularly. However, if you cut off a head, you can kick it around after the battle, which might be a nice way to release stress and fear after the horrible sight of a 2-headed spider. I wouldn't touch that thing with a 2-mirror stick though. Now we move to a franchise that has a huge catalog of creatures to fight and hunt, and I'm of course talking about Monster Hunter. The gameplay cycle of this franchise makes every big enemy a boss encounter, given that every combat mission involves hunting a large creature in order to gather its parts and make better weapons and armor. Therefore, there are 2 creatures that can be considered as full spiders, and a bonus entry that can certainly be a matter of discussion. Let's start with Narcilla. This lovely abomination was first introduced in Monster Hunter 4. It can be found in various areas of the game, although according to the Monster Hunter wiki, they are also known to nest near farming land where livestock are found and prey on them with the occasional unfortunate farmer. Oh no. These creatures are gigantic spiders through and through. They attack the player with their legs and fangs, can inflict poison, and also inflict sleep using a stinger in their abdomen. They also use weight-based attacks to limit the player's mobility, which isn't good considering how quick and agile this monster is. Appearance-wise, yeah, it's horrible as every single spider in existence. Let's move on with the next specimen on the list, Ragnakadaki. This monster appeared in Monster Hunter Rise, and let me tell you, its design is actually very cool. It has a royal look to it, and the webbing covering her body is commonly referenced as a white gown. It's still terrifying, but the cool factor kinda makes you forget about her arachnid existence. Something that I was not aware before doing the research for this video is that Ragnakadaki is similar in design to pelican spiders, in that they have a long extendable neck that can be retracted back on top of the thorax, which is very damn disturbing and something that I really didn't need to know, but hey, know your enemy, right? This giant spider prefers to live in hot areas and, in addition to web-based and physical attacks, which also includes its offspring because, of course, This spider has fire attacks and can inflict burn status on the player. What the hell? Are you supposed to kill spiders with fire? The name of the quest where you first hunt this thing also makes a reference to this. Oh, very clever, Capcom.
Think you're pretty funny, don't you, freak?
The bonus entry in this franchise is by Bailey Day? Fuck it. A monster exclusive to Monster Hunter Online, which is categorized as a carapaciona or crustacean creature. But come on, these things look like a spider with claws, and that is just horrifying. And it can also shoot webs that slow down the player. Just recategorize this thing as an arachnid already, Capcom. Thanks to the whims of the god of RNG, we find ourselves once again talking about roguelites, and once again talking about the Binding of Isaac. I'm gonna keep this short because we already discussed the weird spider enemies in this game, but there are also spider bosses in this game. There's Widow, a boss that can appear in the first 2 floors of the game, which makes it one of the most hated bosses for beginner players due to its fast movements and the ability to spawn spiders and spider sacks. We have the Wretched, which is a harder and uglier version of Widow. Daddy Long Legs, which is just a giant spider head hanging from its limbs that attacks stomping down on the player. Triachnid, which is the alternative version of Daddy Long Legs, and even though it only has one eye, looks more like a real spider than all of the other arachnid bosses in this game. And finally, Rip Creep, an arachnid creature that hangs on the wall to attack the player, and personally, I think this is one of the worst and more annoying bosses in the entire game. Fuck this thing. Moving on into the realms of RPG games, we have a few examples to talk about. One of the most divisive RPGs of the Nintendo Wii is Super Paper Mario, which is fair enough, given that it had the monumental task of living up to the expectations set by Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door. However, the quality of the game is not our concern right now. We're here to talk about Mimi, the shapeshifter. She is one of the main antagonists of the game, working for Count Bleck. She takes many shapes in the game, mostly that of a little green girl, but once she reveals her true form, we can see that it's a giant spider, very reminiscent of the real-life Daddy Long Legs. She chases Mario for a while before the boss battle. This is probably the tamest incarnation of a spider as a boss in this list. However, for a game as cutesy as Super Paper Mario, this certainly is a terrifying entity. Finally, we have another arachnid foe acting as a mini-boss in one of the most popular RPGs in the past few years, Undertale. Look, I'm not a big fan of Undertale, but the game does manage to create a somewhat terrifying boss in the form of Moffat. You find Moffat in a bake sale where the cost of articles can reach up to 9,999 gold, and if the player doesn't buy anything from her, she engages in battle, accusing the player of hating spiders and killing them. Moffat is an anthropomorphic spider, but still looks more like a spider standing on its 2 lower legs than a spider-looking person. She constantly teases the player during the battle about turning them into food, and even tried to feed the player to her mopping spider pet. After many tribulations in the battle, she either lets the player go or the player kills her in the genocide route. And now, for our final mention in this section, let's take a look at a recent take on survival games. One game that arachnophobes can barely touch without getting scared off their pants, the experience known as Grounded. This game features players that were shrunken down to a miniature size, and now every insect is gigantic. The objective of the game is building a base while trying to survive in a garden and defending it from giant bugs, amongst them, you guessed it, giant spiders. Look, I'm gonna be completely honest here. The art style of the game mixes realistic environments and creatures with some cartoony features, but the spiders, holy fuck. The spiders look terrifying in this game. The wolf spiders are massive and terrifying, and the bastards can give you quite the jump scares when exploring caves. Oh great, spiders and jump scares, the perfect combination to make my heart explode and kill me. However, in the Shroom and Doom update, a new boss was added to the game, called the Broodmother. This monstrous fiend can be found in a little spider den full of cobwebs, and this thing is petrifyingly scary if you're afraid of spiders. It is huge, has a lot of eyes, and those 2 fangs on its face that is one of the most frightening features of spiders. As with the other spiders in the game, there are moments where this creature comes extremely close to the camera, even when playing with ranged weapons, which can cause a lot of discomfort for players. Grounded has been a revolutionary game in their approach to spiders, but we'll talk about that later. For now, it is time for some honorable mentions of spiders in games, and we'll go through these ones very quickly, otherwise I'd be here for around 3 hours. So raise your hands and cover your eyes for the Forbidden Forest section and Aragog boss fight in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The PS1 version looks like a human face plastered into a spider, and the PS2 version, well, that is terrifying. Looks and moves like a spider indeed. The Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie's Revenge. There's a giant spider boss called the Crypt Keeper, designed in the purest style of Tim Burton films. Oh, by the way, you defeat this thing by dancing? Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the fight against Shelob in its lair to save Frodo. Limbo, the giant spider that chases you in the first act of the game. Metroid Fusion, Yakuza, the spider boss that Samus must defeat to get back her space jump ability. Dark Souls, Chaos Witch Quelaag, a half-woman, half-spider boss. The final boss in Metroid Prime, not exactly a spider given that it's an alien parasite, but hey, don't tell me that thing isn't shaped like a spider. Zephon, an arachnid-like creature who acts as a boss in Legacy of Kain Soul River. The Armored Spider in Demon Souls. And the Metal Queen in Brutal Legend. We've talked a lot in this video about spiders being the bad guys, the villains, and this is not without reason, given that arachnophobia affects 3.5 to 6.1% of the global population. But not everyone is afraid of spiders. Some people really like these creatures and even have them as pets. So, how come there aren't any games where you play as a spider? Well, there are. Yes, even though there are very, and I mean very few games that use this concept, they exist, and we're gonna take a look at them right now. Playing as a spider? You're insane, Doctor. No one wants to play as a spider doing spider things. And to that I say, well, tell that to the developers of Deadly Creatures. Deadly Creatures is a Wii exclusive that has you playing both as a spider and a scorpion. The two creatures have a different approach in their gameplay, with the scorpion levels being more action oriented, while the spider levels encourage stealth and are less linear, as well as the spider having the ability to shoot webs. In the game, you fight other insects as crickets and beetles, which can also be devoured to gain health. And what are the motivations in the game, you might ask? Well, there are none. There is a plot about two human explorers looking for gold buried in the desert, but that has absolutely nothing to do with the spider or the scorpion, until they get dragged into a story for no reason, with the spider getting caught in a glass tank and the scorpion repeatedly stinging a human in the balls. This game is wild. Now, let's take a look at a more direct approach with Spider the video game. Well, maybe that was too straightforward. This is a 2.5D platforming game for the PS1, and look at this box art. I mean, yes, it looks frightening because it is a sorta realistic spider, but it's also hilarious because, well, the spider has a knife and a gun in two of its legs. What was the designer smoking when making this image? This all makes so much more sense when the game starts and you find out that the spider is cybernetically enhanced and can equip cybernetic leg attachments, hence why the spider has these weapons in the box art. In this game, you traverse various levels to get to the end, and it's worth noting that you use actual spider-like abilities like crawling on the walls and ceilings and using webs to hang from the ceiling in order to advance through the levels. We can also mention both Spider the Secret of Bryce Manor and Spider Rite of the Shrouded Moon, which are puzzle games where you have to eat a specific number of insects in each level to progress. There is also an optional side quest to find out what happened to the former occupants of the place by looking for clues and secrets in the levels, which is a pretty interesting concept that doesn't directly interfere with the objectives of the Spider character, and a nice starting point on how to create stories for this type of games featuring spiders or other critters. On a more recent note, we have Webbed, which was released in 2021. Here you play as a spider in a quest to save her boyfriend from a bird. It is a simple and cute looking platform game that uses the spider web mechanic for traversal and puzzle solving, and even for an arachnophobe, the spider character in this game looks kinda cute. It is small and not extremely terrifying to look at, which is always a very nice detail. As an additional note, we can mention Weber, a playable character in Don't Starve that is basically one of the spiders of the game attached to a human body. You'd think that this is just a design choice, but it actually has a reason, given that according to the game's lore, Weber is a child that lives inside a spider that tried to eat him. And people still wonder why I'm scared of spiders. This character has some interesting abilities, such as spiders not being hostile to him, being able to eat monster food without any bad consequences, and growing a beard made of silk. Alright, now that we have taken a look at how spiders are represented in video games, there is one question to be answered. Are spiders truly necessary for games? Should they continue to be used in games or get eliminated from the face of reality? There was a Kotaku article that caught my attention back when it was published in October 2020, where the writer begged game developers to, quote-unquote, cut it out with the spiders. As a fellow arachnophobe, I can sympathize with the sentiment of not wanting to see these monsters on my games. However, once I checked the comments to make some research for this video, I found a comment from a developer asking where do they draw the line in regards to this, and if there should be options to cut out content that could possibly trigger different phobias. That got me thinking about some of the accessibility options some games have for this kind of stuff, given that some devs or fans have come up with solutions to this issue. Let's return to Skyrim and its horrifyingly ugly looking spiders. The modding community has made a lot of mods to remove spiders from the game. Some turn them into bears, others turn them into monster-looking Spider-Man. Hell, some people just want to watch the world burn and make these spiders even more hideous with mods, to which I ask, why? Well, that's all good and fine, but what about people who want to play Skyrim on consoles? They have no way of applying these mods. And to that I say, yes, you are absolutely right. I play Skyrim on my Switch because, yeah, I'm that kind of person, and I have no way of using these mods. I have to play the vanilla experience with these scary looking monstrosities, which means I can't play Skyrim at night or else I might have a heart attack. These accessibility options shouldn't rely solely on modding, and to that I have an answer with one of the last games I mentioned, Grounded. The spiders in Grounded are an essential part of the game, so it's not like they can be ignored by players who want to play the game, and they can appear so out of nowhere that it might pose a big issue. In this case, Obsidian added an arachnophobia safe mode, which can alter the spider's appearance in order to make them less terrifying for players. This is actually a very well thought and clever system, given that it doesn't remove spiders entirely from the game, but rather has various levels that remove different features from the models in the game. At level 1, the number of legs is reduced from 8 to 4. At level 2, all the legs disappear. At level 3, the mouth is removed. At level 4, all facial features are removed from the spider. And at level 5, spiders are transformed into a larva state, with only transparent bodies and heads floating and attacking the player. This change is only visual, so spiders are still very aggressive and dangerous, but less threatening to the eyes. This is a great option for players with this phobia to be able to play and fully enjoy the game without having to worry about having a panic attack, but this is an example rather than the norm. Not every studio that uses spiders in games has the budget to integrate these kind of options into the game, and might as well be a waste of resources if the spiders are not an essential part of the gameplay experience. Furthermore, taking this into account would mean that all possible phobias should be considered by developers when making games, something that would seriously limit creativity. When you have a phobia and there's a game that is specifically built around that, you have two options. You either play the game, knowing that it will make you anxious and scare you, or you just avoid the game altogether. Are you afraid of heights? Maybe you should stay away from playing Mirror's Edge. Are you afraid of rats? Maybe you should avoid playing A Plague Tale: Innocence. And before you put out your pitchforks and torches and tell me how much of an asshole I am, there are lots of other games that can be enjoyed and don't revolve about a specific thing that might scare you to death, as it all comes down to personal taste and preferences. So, to answer the question, should spiders disappear from games entirely? I think not. Spiders are a common enemy trope that can feel lazy or tiresome, but when used correctly, they can represent great boss encounters, thrilling enemies, or even useful allies. They have a lot of presence in gaming, but as we saw in this video, they are often an afterthought and very scarcely are they the main focus of a game. As long as there are caves, creepy abandoned houses, and deep forest, spiders will be prowling around waiting for the next victim, and as terrifying as that idea might be, it's totally fine. Again, this is just my opinion on the subject, and if you disagree, feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear different perspectives both from people with and without arachnophobia. This has been all for today, my patients. I hope you've enjoyed our 8-leg adventure today, and if you like this format and want to see more videos like this, let me know in the comments. And remember, one game a day keeps the plague doctor away. See ya!